What are the commands we have installed is sudo apt install docker.io, and without using the
That's screen sharing.
okay, sudo apt install docker.io. Then say if you don't want to run the commands using the sudo user, then what is the command we need to type?
Sudo user mod
User mod hyphen
---
group.
h
Docker is the
Docker and
group,
user.
and no dollar user we need to use, or that username is Ubuntu. Okay, so Ubuntu is the username. Okay, then we need to exit, again need to reconnect. In the same session, it's not possible. Again, we need to reconnect in order to effect that one. Okay, so Docker is the command line tool, and get the version of the Docker using the Docker version. Then Docker info shows all the information, lot of information we can get it through Docker info also. Then Docker run hello world. Maybe for the testing purpose, we can use this Docker run hello world, because we want to confirm whether our Docker hello world kind of command, it is Docker daemon or Docker CLI contacts the daemon. Daemon will contact the registry. From the registry, that hello world is going to download, and from that it is going to run that container. And after that, that container is exiting. But what Docker PS will show?
All the running containers.
Yeah, all the running containers. But this hello world, it won't display. If you want that running containers also, then we need to use
Yes, -a.
yeah, -a for all the running containers. Okay, Docker images will show us. So Docker images will show us what it shows. All the pulled images locally, what are the images have been pulled, it is going to show those images. So Docker images is going to download all the images. Then Docker RM, that container ID to delete not running containers. Okay, if you want to remove it, running containers, you want to remove the running containers, we need to use -f. -f. -f stands for
Forcefully.
Forcefully we need to delete that container. And if you want to remove that image, the Docker RMI is the command. Docker RMI to delete that image or image ID or image name, we need to specify. Image name to specify. Okay, so then how to run the Nginx container? How to run the Nginx container? Say Docker run. Instead of run, we can use one more option also. What is that? Instead of using run, we can use one more option also. Using the create also, we can create. Using the create option also, we can create --name my Nginx. Any name we can give. Then like we are going to give the -p. Publish port we are going to give. Inside port is 80 itself, and outside port we can give any of the port which is available in the host. And when we are accessing the container, do we need to use the port 8080 or 80? We can access it using 8080, not through 80. But this 8080 is redirecting to 80. And what is this meaning of -d?
Detach mode.
Yeah, -d is detach mode. Container is running in the background, running in the background. If you don't use detach mode, that container is running. And what is that meaning of Nginx? That Nginx is the image name. If we specify image without tag, what will happen? If you specify image without like using the tag, what will happen?
Will download the latest version.
Latest one. If you don't want the latest one, then give the exact tag you need to specify. If you don't use the latest one, then better to specify the latest. Say by default, it would be download the latest one. Okay. So then Docker PS again we need to use, and Docker info again you type to get how many containers are running and all those. And that image also is going to download. We'll run one more container. Docker run hyphen name my tomcat. I'm going to give -p 8081, but it's a tomcat, right? 8082 I'm going to use, -8 I'm going to give. Okay, this is going to download the Tomcat 8 version. Then Docker run my Tomcat 9. I'm going to give 8082. Internal port is 8080 itself. -d Tomcat 9. In the same way, even I can run the Tomcat 10 also. For Tomcat 10, I no need to give the version also. It automatically downloads the latest version. In this scenario, for the Tomcat 8, 9, and Tomcat, how many images are getting pulled? In that scenario, how many images are getting pulled in that scenario? So in that scenario,
Three.
three images are going to pull. Okay, so three images are getting downloaded because the latest one is different, 9 is different, and 8 is different. So like this, the total three images are getting downloaded. Okay, where all those images are getting stored? Where all those images are stored? All those images have been stored from the Docker Hub. We are getting downloaded. All those are getting downloaded from the Docker Hub. Okay, so then again you type the Docker PS and check all those details. Okay, so then Docker, like if you want to enter inside the container, okay, or if you want to check the logs, Docker logs, okay, my Tomcat, or Docker logs, my Tomcat 9. So like this, we can get the logs also. Then Docker stats we can use to get the monitoring information. Then Docker top container name to get again the basic process details of that running container details, all those. Then lifecycle related commands also. That lifecycle meaning is stop related, or maybe start, restart, or maybe kill, pause, or unpause. Okay, kill, pause, unpause, and we have this RM. These all comes under the life cycle kind of the container. Okay, so these all the comes under the life cycle of the container. Okay, then how to enter inside the container? How to enter inside the container is Docker. Any idea? how we can enter inside the container. Okay, so exec hyphen it. Okay, the Docker container ID or name, then bin bash. Bin bash. Okay, so this is the command to enter inside the container. Hyphen it means I stands for interactive. TTY. TTY mode is like into the shell. Okay. So bin bash. Said I'll try to explain in the Docker file. I'll explain more. By default, in order to run any container, one command is required. Using that CMD or command, our containers are executing. Our containers are executing. We can override those container command by using exec-it command. What is the meaning of overriding? Already that container is running using one command, but if I enter /bin bash, what's happening? It is entering into the bash of the container. It is entering inside the bash of the container we can enter. So like this, it's going to enter inside the container. Okay. So then tell me what happens here, Docker exec hyphen it container ID, then pwd. What it will do? Where that pwd command is running? Where that pwd is running?
Inside the container.
Inside the container. Then what is the result it shows is inside the container, what is the present working directory is there, it shows. Okay, say Docker exec hyphen it container ID. Then what is ls will do inside that present working directory, what are the files and directories are there, it is going to print. But what bin bash is doing? What bin bash is doing there? We are intelligently using this kind of command overriding, and we are entering inside. We are entering inside. We are entering inside the bash of the container. We are entering inside the bash of the container we are entering. Is it fine?
Sir, what
Like,
is bash?
yeah.
That is
What
one of
is
the shell kind of like a, we can use either shell kind of a module or Bourne shell is there. Means where you are typing the commands, right? Okay, so once you log into that, you are running the the commands, all those, and bash is also one of the commands where we can execute all the bash or shell kind of commands. Those are the two different ways of how the Linux will interpret the commands and all those. So we can use the scripts also. So most of the commands, all those are, we are going to use either shell or bash kind of things. Bash is also a specific type of shell itself, but most of the Docker images have been written in the Bourne shell.
So what is this override those container commands?
Come
Like,
again?
you said we can override these container commands by
Your
using.
container normally it's going to run using catalina.sh run. So that is in the Docker PS. You can see by using which command your
Yes,
container is
yes.
running.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So we can
if that,
override these.
yeah, that's we are just overriding with this command. By default, if that command is not running, automatically your container will exit. But here we can override it through like using the Docker exec.
Okay.
Those all the commands if you use after container ID, what are the commands you have given? Those all the commands are executing inside the Docker. Inside the Docker, those commands are running and it shows the print. Any doubts on that? Then how to copy the files from Linux host to container? How we can copy the files from one Linux host to any idea what is the command? So what is the command is docker cp is the command. Then source container id colon that destination path. So we'll discuss some scenario docker cp. I have my Jenkins dot var I have. Then my Tomcat 9 is my container. In that the destination path is maybe user local Tomcat. Then into that web apps folder I want to copy into that web apps folder. Okay, so then try to understand this. What it will do, you need to tell. So what this is going to do?
So here I didn't mention the source, right?
Come again?
You didn't mention the source, like you said,
No,
Jenkins
no, that dot. No, no. This is going to copy from the container logs
container.
are getting copied to the local folder. It is getting copied. So previous one locally we have Jenkins dot var. I'm copying that inside to container. But in the second command, my source is container. In the container, in the user log, user local Tomcat logs, I want to any doubts on that?
So in the second line, we are copying files from container, like so
From
container
container to
to
local.
local. Oh, sorry.
Is it fine? So, but one of the challenge here is one of the challenge of like a container is for data inside the container is not persistent if container is stopped or deleted or hanged, something it's not working properly. Okay. So then we are going to lose the data. So we are going to lose the data. 1 second. Okay, so now one of the challenge for the data inside the container is if the container is stopped or deleted or hanged, we are going to lose the data. Okay, for that solution is, can you tell me what is the solution? What is the solution? We need to use Docker volumes. Even in AWS also, all the data we are going to keep in the EBS volumes, right? What happens? Even if the instance delete also, we can keep the data is persistent. The EBS volume, we can keep it as persistent. Okay. In the same way, the data we are not going to keep inside the container. Say, can you tell me some examples of which type of data? Say, can you tell me some examples of which type of data? So which type of data we need to store in volumes?
Like user information sensitive data.
Come again?
Like user information and all.
Not user information. User information, all those would be stored in the database. Okay, say application data. Maybe that var file kind of things, all those. Then logging. Okay, so application data, application like okay, so even application is creating a lot of folders where it stores maybe some file processing, whether that file is successful or failure, or if any images have been uploaded to your web servers. That kind of data I'm not going to lose even if my container is deleted. So that's the reason that kind of data we need to store in. That kind of data we need to store in the
Docker
the
volume.
volumes. So if you don't use the volumes, what is the risk?
We might lose the data.
Yeah, we may lose the data. That is the reason it's mandatory we need to use the volumes. And in the volumes, so we have the three methods. Normal, first one is Docker volumes, means we are going to create a volume. Then second one is bind mount. Third one is TMPFS. So Docker volume supports three types of things. One is Docker volumes. Second one is bind mount. Third one is TMPFS. So these are the three different. Among these, even if it supports three also, we are going to use Docker volumes itself. And we need to understand even the Docker networking also. What's going to happen with the Docker networking is, say, we created a container my Nginx using that IP address colon 8080. We can access that container outside also we can access or not. From outside, are we accessing it or not? We created one container Nginx or my Nginx one. Are we able to access it or not from outside? My Nginx, all those we can access from outside also. Okay, so we can access from outside also. Okay, then if it is like a Tomcat, 8081. Like this, we are going to access those containers from outside also. That means by default, that container, we are getting one type of network that is bridge. So what is the advantage of network bridges? We can access a container from outside. We can access the container from outside. Okay, by default, if you don't do anything also, we are getting rich network. If you don't do anything also, by default, what is the network we are getting? Bridge networks. That is the reason whatever the containers we have created, it is getting access from outside also. It is getting access from outside also. Then what is the meaning of host network? Only from host, it means container is accessible. From outside, it's not possible. That means what is that host mission is? We have a Linux mission we are creating, right? On that we run all those commands. From that Linux mission only it's accessible, not possible from not possible from outside, not possible from the outside. So that is the advantage. We'll go for host network. Okay. So by default, which network we are getting? If you don't do anything also, bridge. By default, we are getting the bridge network itself. Yeah. Any doubts on this? And normally we'll have one more mode is there called as Docker Swarm mode. So we'll discuss what is the Docker Swarm mode. There we are going to get overlay. And none means what is the difference between host and none? At least if I use the host, it's accessible from the host mission. But if I use none, even it's completely isolated. Even I can't access from outside also. That's a just isolated kind of thing. It's not possible to access it from anywhere. Is it fine? Okay, in the Docker Swarm, we are getting overlay. By default, we'll get the overlay because we'll have the multiple missions. That's in that Swarm mode. We'll discuss. Okay. So then we have one more. One more is there. Mac VLAN. So with the Mac VLAN, Mac ID also for every container. We are getting a Mac ID also for every container. By default, we don't get the Mac ID. Okay. To the host mission only, we'll have the Mac ID. Okay. But if you want the MAC ID for the container, then we need to use MAC VLAN. But we don't use this MAC VLAN, but these are the network drivers supported and IPv LAN. IPv LAN supports both IPv6 and IPv4 also. Dual stack also is possible with the dual stack also is possible with the. Okay, so these are all the different type of network drivers. Okay, can you tell me what are the types of volumes we have? So what are the volumes we have? So first one is Docker volumes. Normally we need to create a volume and that need to be attached to the container or bind mount or TMP-FS. And in the networking, in the networking. In the networking, we have the bridge, host, overlay, none, MAC VLAN, and IP VLAN. By default, which one we are getting? By default, which one we are getting? By default, which one we are getting if you don't use any network driver? By default, we are getting the bridge one. And what is the difference between bridge and host? What is the difference between bridge and host? If I use bridge from outside also it's accessible, but if I use host, it's accessible only from the host machine itself. From outside, it's not possible to access. What is the between the host and none? Host and none, what is the difference? Host is at least from the host machine we can access, but if I go for none, if I go to none, from no mission we are going to access from nowhere we are going to access the container. Okay, then what is MAC VLAN? What is the MAC VLAN? By default, we don't get the MAC ID for every container. Only to the host only will have the MAC ID, but some very sensitive kind of applications may require the MAC ID for the container also. Then for every container, it's going to assign one MAC ID. Then we need to use the driver is MAC VLAN. IP VLAN, both we want to use IPv6 and IPv4 and IPv6, both dual stack of IPs. We are going to get it if we use IP VLAN. But these all just the basic knowledge we require because we don't use the Docker much. Everything will use the Kubernetes itself. But if you understand Docker, we can understand Kubernetes in a better way. But Kubernetes have like their own CNI kind of network drivers, all those. But these all will require the basic knowledge. Yeah, any doubts on this? The volumes, networks, all those will create in the Kubernetes itself. Yeah. Any doubts on this? Any doubts? Hello? Any doubts on this? So normally, if we don't create any like a network also, it is going to use bridge network itself. If you don't use any network also, it's going to use the bridge network. But by default, we are going to use, normally in the production also, we'll use Docker Swarm itself. There we are going to get the overlay kind of network. And what are the command line tools to create the volume and networking is? Docker volume is the command line tool to create the volumes, all those. And Docker network is the command line to create our own networks. Okay, so these all just go through that video which I have shared. And other Docker components, what are the Docker other components we have will discuss. So for me, from the Docker wise, which is very, very important for the Kubernetes is a Docker file. Remaining all we are going to use Kubernetes itself, but we need the images. That images we are going to build through Dockerfile. So can you tell me what is the purpose of Dockerfile? So what is the purpose of Dockerfile? What is the purpose of Dockerfile? So the purpose of the Dockerfile is our own customized images we can provision through Docker file. Okay. So what is the name of the Docker file? Is Docker file itself. Okay. So we need to specify the instructions. From those instructions, we are going to build images. And in the production, what we need to do is we need to build images, scan images locally, tag them, push to registry. In our environment, what is the registry? Is the Docker Hub in AWS environment, AWS ECR, or in Azure environment, Azure ACR. So these all the ways we are going to push to Docker Hub. Okay. Then we are going to deploy into Docker or Compose or Swarm or Stack or finally into Kubernetes. But even either in Docker to deploy or Compose to deploy or Docker Swarm to deploy or Kubernetes we don't deploy. What we need is, what we required. So we required the Docker image, Docker files, Docker file. Okay. If I have 12 microservices, can you tell me how many Docker files would be there? One Docker file is enough or 12 Docker files are required? If I have 12 microservices for my application, okay, say how many Docker files are required?
We can share the Docker file, right?
No. We require for each and every microservice, one Docker file is required. Okay, so one Docker file is okay. So, and scan those images. Why we need to scan those images is we are going to deploy them in the production environment, right? Before that, we need to scan, and there are a lot of security standards we need to follow. And what is tag? I'll explain. We need to rename. Just to tag is a rename kind of thing. We need to rename according to our registry. Locally, you can keep any name, but to push to the registry, we need to rename those images or need to tag them accordingly. Appropriate tag and version. Okay, all those we need to specify. And finally, we need to push them to the registry. Once we push the registry, Docker job is done. For deployment, 90% we don't use the Docker. We are going to use where we are going to deploy our applications.
Kubernetes.
In the Kubernetes. Okay, then if someone asks about what is Dockerfile, what you will tell? What is Dockerfile? Having set of instructions, from that we can create our own images. Okay, then there is one more like a resource is there. Docker Compose. The Docker Compose. What is the purpose of the Docker Compose is? What is the purpose of the Docker Compose is? Using Docker run command, using the Docker run command, we can install only one container. We can run only one container. Okay, but using Docker Compose, we can run multiple containers single shot. So if you want to run the multiple containers as a single shot, we can use Docker Compose. So what is the advantage? Say suppose in the previous example I said, right, we have 10 microservices. For each microservice, I have created one image. But all those 10 I want to deploy. Then I need to use Docker run commands 10 times I need to build. But if I use the Docker Compose, what's going to happen? If I use the Docker Compose, what's going to happen? Please tell me what's going to happen.
Yeah, we can install multiple containers.
We can run the multiple as a single shot. We can create. Okay. So using that we can create the multiple containers. We can create it. Okay. So multiple containers start, stop, restart, remove. Okay. So those also we can do through the compose itself for multiple containers. Yeah. So then even we can create networks and volumes also we can create for all those. If I want multiple volumes and multiple networks for each container, all as a single shot, we can deploy our application using Docker Compose. So using the Docker Compose, it's going to run. Okay. So any doubts on this Docker Compose? Can you tell me, say here also, for the Compose to use, for the Compose, we'll use Docker compose file. It's a Docker compose file, which is based on YAML. Docker file is not based on YAML. So their own instructions are there, but Docker compose file uses which scripting it is using. It's a YAML kind of script, but Docker file is not based. Can you tell me what is the difference between Docker compose and Docker file?
Dockerfile is where we create customized images.
Yeah, Docker file is to create our own customized image. First, we need to use Docker file or Docker compose file.
Dockerfile.
Docker file. If you are using Kubernetes, which is not required, Docker file or Docker compose file, which is not required.
Docker compose file.
A Docker compose is not required because directly we'll use Kubernetes methods itself. But Docker file is mandatory. Okay.
Okay, sir. And we have Docker commit also in the video.
Yeah, that we'll discuss after Docker file. I'll explain. So we need to discuss more on the Docker file. Okay, so Docker file is more important. If you have already container is there, from that you can create an image. Okay, say images we can create using one method is Docker file. Second method is Docker commit. But in the DevOps, which is recommended is in the DevOps, which method is recommended is Docker file itself. The Docker file is the recommended method to create it. Okay, so then Docker Swarm. So normally with the one single isolated container, we don't get the scalability of the production scalability. We need to go for group of multiple containers, multiple Docker host or engine as a single entity is called as swarm. So can you tell me what is the swarm mode? Yesterday we kept one host, right? So with that host, we don't get the production scalability. So group of Docker missions or group of, say we may have hundreds or thousands of engines as a single entity we are going to maintain as a single entity. So that is called as
Docker Swarm.
Docker Swarm. In the Docker Swarm is the competitor for Kubernetes, whereas Docker is nowhere competitor to Kubernetes. Okay, so Docker, like maybe another word what we can use is Docker cluster is called as Docker Swarm. So what is the advantage is as a group of Docker instance, it can bear the production scalability, production like capability of the application, high scalability of the user, and we can extend more number of users, auto scaling kind of features. All those are possible with the Docker Swarm or Kubernetes. It's not possible with a Docker engine. But either in the Docker Swarm or Kubernetes, backend we have is one container runtime is mandatory. One container runtime is mandatory. Yeah. Any doubts on this? So what is the Docker Swarm is? Group of Docker, multiple Docker engines as a single entity is called as as a single entity is called as
Docker Swarm.
Docker Swarm. So Docker Swarm like is one of the competitor to Kubernetes. Even we have one more is maybe OpenShift is there, or PCF, Pivotal, Cloud Foundry. So these all comes under orchestration kind of tools. Okay, in Swarm mode, we don't create containers. Okay, so we don't create the containers. Okay, we will create services and stack. Service is, say this is a not normal service. This is a Docker service. What is this Docker service is equal is multiple replicas we are creating for one microservice. Say that means I have an application, maybe order is one microservice, catalog is one microservice, admin is one microservice. Okay, if I want to go for order kind of thing, all those, I want this maybe 100 containers I want to run. That means in this scenario, catalog I want these all different microservices. Payment gateway also I want around 50. Admin less people are there. I want 10 microservices. Then can you tell me how many services are required here? In this scenario, can you tell me how many images, how many containers, how many services, how many stack do you need to create? Yeah, can you tell me how many images are required for this scenario? How many microservices we have for this scenario? How many microservices are there for this scenario? Please tell me ఏదో ఒక number ఏదో ఒకటి చెప్పండి. What is that? What is your understanding? So in this scenario, we have total four images we have. Okay, so total we required 4 images. But each one is one microservice. And how many containers are total running is 100, 200, 300, 350,
360 containers.
360. Instead of containers, those are technically containers itself. We'll call them as replicas. And how many services are running in this scenario?
4 services.
4 services. Okay, for each again order service may have 100 replicas and okay, so like this in the Swarm mode we don't deal with containers or replicas directly. We will deal with services.
Services and stack.
Okay, so even those 4 services also as a single stack
Single
file we
stack.
can create. Single stack can create multiple services, and each service will create multiple containers. So each service will create multiple containers. Any doubts on this? Normally in the real time, a single command, okay, so we'll write one stack file. Stack file also almost compose itself. It also uses the YAML itself. Docker stack deploy stack name, stack name. Okay, then -c is the stack file, then that stack file dot YAML. So this will create all those.
Sir, how do we determine the stack? The single stack or dual stack or
No, we are going to design all this for your microservice based application. If you have 10 to 12, that is up to us. But that complete application we are going to deploy as a stack file.
Okay.
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 So this, if you want to delete the stack also, single shot. Update the stack also. Update the stack also. All as a single shot. Network, volume, all those can be done as a single shot. Okay, so that's possible through the stack file. Okay, so that is the reason in the real time for the production application deployment, we are going to get the scalability. But even we are using a lot of advantages of technically, we have a lot of advantages to use the SWAM mode. But the production workloads, we are going to use Kubernetes itself. For the production workloads, we are going to use Kubernetes itself. Okay, any doubts? Any doubts on this? But normally for we need to have a knowledge on all this. Other than Docker files and scan them, push them to the registry, remaining all we are going to use the Kubernetes objects itself. We don't directly deal with the Docker Swarm, Docker Compose, volumes, networks, all those. We have our own Kubernetes resources are there. Okay.
Okay, sir. Then what is the difference between Jenkins and this Kubernetes?
No. Jenkins is nowhere related to Kubernetes. Jenkins is just our CI/CD tool.
Okay.
To deploy our application in the microservice environment, we can't maintain some thousands or some we are going to maintain them as the teeny microservices instead of using multiple thousands of Linux machines. All those we'll use maybe 100 cluster Kubernetes like this. We are going to deploy, which is almost equal to 1,000 VMs. Means with the very less infrastructure, 1/3 or 1/4 of the infrastructure, less infrastructure itself, we can deploy our microservices. Easy to update, easy to roll back. So it's single command, right? If you want to update, you can use the stack file, you can just update. Rollback, you can do through single command. Normally, it's very tough process with the normal application, whereas microservices, deployment with the Kubernetes, even a very large scale application deployment, all those are very easy to perform. Yeah, any other doubts? So after this class, asking Jenkins versus Kubernetes means so both are two different use cases. Finally, instead of using the Linux servers, we are going to deploy in the microservices using either container or orchestration kind of tool. But for all those Jenkins or maybe there are a lot of other pipeline tools also, and other deployment tools also like Argo CD is there, or GitLab Actions we can use. Now we have a lot of solutions for the CI/CD. Yeah. So what about others? Any other doubts? So just finish that volume network again. Once again, finish that. You are not going through all the videos are not going through. Just roughly you are going. Okay. And today I'll share one more, the Docker file also try. Docker file is very important for us. Okay,
Okay.
sure. And finish all those Docker commands also. 4 to 5 times you need to finish all this. Okay.